The 9mm as a survival caliber. That's what we're going to talk about today. We all probably know that the 9mm is the de facto standard defensive handgun caliber of our day. Really no disputing that. Like it or not, it just is. But what about for survival in a broader sense? How do we maximize the potential of the 9mm to make it more versatile? That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, tactics, ballistics, gun-adjacent stuff the right way with Almighty God at the center, biblical, Judeo-Christian values, real-world, first-hand experience. I'm blessed to serve you as host, bio, bullet points in the show notes. Welcome, hopefully welcome back, gunfighters, gun enthusiasts. Maybe just gun curious. What's up? Let's talk about the 9mm. Okay, you might think it's a simple topic. It is not. I have a bunch of notes on this. Thought about this quite a bit. If you don't know, I've talked about it before. I moved to 9mm long before it was the hot thing when everybody was saying, you got to have a 40 and you got to have a 45. And for a time, I fell into that caliber trap myself. A caliber warrior carrying a 45 on duty. There were times later on where I still would for specific missions like carrying an M45A1. But even back when everybody was saying it's got to be a 40 or bigger, I started getting competition shooting and actually shooting on targets for time. And I thought, no, the 9mm is where it is. It's the best balance. And I moved to that even when I was in one of my immediate circle I knew of that was shooting 9mm on duty. Made the most sense. And I think, and this was long before the F.B.I. went back to it. I think that's largely what the rest of the gun culture has seen. There's still a few caliber warriors out there, but for the vast majority of people, they realize 9mm makes the most sense. And it certainly does for a general, there are outliers, so settle down. General recommendation for what a man should carry on his hip. 9mm, semi-automatic. Magazine-fed, strong side hip, preferably with an optic, a full-size, man-size fighting handgun where the 9mm shines. I'm not going to debate all the different, this versus that. I'm going to try to get you to put down the Glock Kool-Aid today. Doesn't really matter. Carrying a full-size fighting handgun, strong side hip is the best option for the vast majority of people in modern society. You haven't been neutered, so you can't carry one. Now, for that, the 9mm, one of the reasons it's so good today is the advancements in defensive handgun ammunition technology. Largely, those were developed for law enforcement in a full-size fighting handgun. One of the reasons, one of several, but one of the reasons is because much of the really good defensive handgun ammunition of today was developed for a full-size fighting handgun, not for a little baby #MeToo pocket gun, but a full-size fighting handgun. That ammunition is good, and it does well, and it does expand. Most of the time, the vast majority of the time, nothing is 100% in ballistics, but really good go-to defensive ammunition. So that's what we're going to talk about first. Really good, street-proven, modern hollow point ammunition for a full-size fighting handgun. Done several nerd out episodes on these, but the big ones: Spear Gold Dot, Federal HST, Winchester Ranger T. It's one of my favorite go-tos, that and the Spear Gold Dot. Remington Golden Saber, Hornady Critical Duty. Any of these really good ones, and there are others, right? This is not an exhaustive list, but get one that's proven, that's street proven, that's used and well known. You'll be able to get in a year or two, so you don't always have to constantly change out your ammo. The next latest and greatest. It's a game changer. It says game changer, revolutionary. There's nothing really revolutionary about the 9mm. It's been around over 100 years. It's older than the 45 ACP. When you claim something is revolutionary and a game changer, that's probably a pretty big red flag. None of this crazy off-the-rails experimental ammo. Good street-proven, modern hollow point designs. But in that ammunition, it's a good, viable self-defense option. Pick one of those for your good go-to fighting handgun. That's the number one thing you're going to use 9mm for. That's the main reason 9mm is so popular. and then I've pushed for a long time, get a training round that matches point of aim, point of impact, recoil impulse, feeding dimensions, your defensive ammo. Be the guy that carries 147 grain plus P plus, but you shoot 115 grain Winchester white box. Nothing wrong with 115 grain Winchester white box. It's a standard range fodder. It's probably not going to shoot the same point of aim, point of impact as your 147 grain plus P plus, right? And the whole point of shooting is to hit what you're aiming at, hopefully not just to make noise. Your practice ammo needs to match your training ammo. I'm not going to say for everything all the time, right? If you're practicing CQB tactics at, inside of 3 yards, the difference is academic. But if you're actually doing like well-aimed fire, it's not academic. You need to hit where you're aiming. I talked about this ad nausea, but if you don't think it's important to hit where you're aiming, you're probably listening to the wrong podcast. Get a training ammo that matches your defensive ammo, point of aim, point of impact, feeding dimension, so you know that it actually works in your gun. You can have a really good high-quality gun and a really good high-quality hollow point that doesn't feed in that gun. Nothing wrong with the gun, nothing wrong with the ammo, it just doesn't pair well. Just like relationships, you could have a decent, high-quality, good woman and a good, moral-based Christian man. That doesn't mean that they're going to go well together. If there's anything inherently other than the relation of the fall wrong with either person, they're just not a good match. The same can happen with handguns and hollow points, or handguns and certain kinds of ammunition. So make sure it matches, make sure it feeds, make sure it hits where you're aiming. That's the big bulk of the things in 9mm. I've talked about that ad nausea. This is just a brief flyover of that. That's important. Now this is about survival. Now that is part of survival, right? Protecting yourself and others. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. If you would protect your own life, you ought to feel the same conviction to defend your neighbor's life, right? All these people are like, I just carry a gun for me. If there's a mass shooting, I'm just going to leave. I'm not going to sit here and that's not me. I'm a man. I've made kind of lifelong careers out of protecting myself and others. I'm not that dude. You're in a movie theater, somebody starts shooting, dropping old ladies, little kids. You're just like, well, I'm just going to leave. It's not. Are you your brother's keeper? Right? You should be willing to defend other people's lives at the risk of your own life, right? If that's not you, again, you're probably listening to the wrong podcast. Jesus laid down his life, even for people that hated him, reviled him, and spit on him. Not willing to put your life on the line for other people, go listen to another podcast. Anyway, that was just a tangent. I don't know where that... Anyway, let's get back on topic. Just not a big fan of cowardly men. Where was I? Oh, the duality of survival. I've talked about this before. There's two parts to survival, right? Protecting yourself and providing for yourself and others. You look at my bio in the show notes. Military, decorated combat veteran, few times over. 2 branches of the armed service. L.A.P.D, working some of the crazy assignments in some of the nastiest streets in the country. Private contracting. I've been in quite a few violent encounters where life was on the line, mine and other people's, as you might imagine. It would take me a while to tally those up, and to be honest, I don't want to. But even that, over 20 years in doing those sort of things, not shying away from risky situations, in fact, oftentimes putting myself in them, it pales in comparison to the number of times I've had to eat. Period. I also do quite a bit of hunting. I've been a professional guide, professional hunter. What is a professional hunter? Just like anything else professional. Well, a hobbyist hunter pays to go hunting. A professional hunter gets paid to go hunting, culling animals, maintaining herds, guiding other people. I've been blessed to do all that. That is part of survival. Now, normally, you go to the store and get food. That's great. I go to the store and get food. We're just picking apart a chicken carcass. We got, some store, like when you buy the whole chickens. It's easy. It's convenient. I get it. But what if, go with me here, what if you can't? What if there are no stores open? What if there is no food at the store? What about a world like that? Can you put food on the table? That's part of survival. Now, I'm here to tell you, 9mm is not great for that. It's not great for that. It's not great for that. I don't care who says that it is. It's not. And this is coming from somebody that has been blessed to do a ton of handgun hunting. I do that because it's a challenge. I do that because it's hard. I do that because it's a personal test of my skill that makes it way harder than hunting with a rifle or a shotgun. I would consider it more a challenge. That's not what I want when I'm in a survival scenario. I have been blessed to take deer with and all manner of game with 9, 40, 45, and I've certainly dropped a bunch of venison with 9mm. 40, 45, I've also taken small game, squirrel, rabbit, beaver with 9mm. It's hard though. It will work, it's hard. It's not ideal for that. I'm talking about in a handgun. I often tell people, whatever caliber you have within reason, right? Whatever distance you can reliably put that round in like a paper plate, that's your ethical distance. For a 9mm, for something like a deer, I would not say a pie plate. I would say something like a silver dollar. For those of you that are young and have never seen a silver dollar, picture a petite lady's bald fist, about that size. That's about the size I think is ethical with a 9mm with a handgun for deer. You can spot and stalk up behind them. They don't know you're there, and you shoot them right where the spine meets the base of the skull. That's a tiny target. You can shoot them other places, and they will die, but the whole point you're shooting them is to eat them. In a survival situation, you might not have 2 days to track a wounded deer. So you may expend more calories than you have, and you may die in the process. So a 9mm and a handgun, not ideal for that. Now, I'm not here to tell you have to pick 147 grains. I personally like 147 grains, and it's partially for this reason. Partially because, going back to earlier, no matter how great and fancy new technology hollow points are, they don't always expand. Weird things can happen. I get hit a bone in a weird random angle and start to tumble or whatever. And if it's pre-clogged with some kind of elastomer or plastic or polymer tip, something can happen where it doesn't expand. In that case, I think truncated cone bullets, flat-pointed truncated cones, do better ballistically even when they don't expand. Similar to an old semi-wad cutter. I think that's a better design than a round nose bullet for terminal performance, the performance inside the target. For that reason, I generally standardize on 147s. Now, again, going back to that training ammo, point of aim, point of impact, a heavy for caliber, truncated cone, flat-pointed bullet is not the worst for this. In fact, it's one of the best choices for this. So if you settle on 147 for defense and you practice with 147s, like something I commonly do, a 147 grain Spear Lawman and a 147 grain Spear Gold Dot or Gold Dot G2, it's a pretty good pairing. And for hunting, let's say small, medium game, you're not going to destroy a bunch of meat with a 147 grain truncated cone, and you're also not going to suffer from lack of penetration you might with some lighter options. 147 grain truncated cone, if you're hunting, say, medium-sized game, again, it's not great, but for a 9mm, it's probably one of the best. One of the reasons I prefer it. Now, I'm not telling you if you want to carry 115s all the time, you're wrong. You certainly can, and they're certainly generally more available and affordable. Now, 9mm is available in more platforms than just handguns. Especially recently, there has been a cornucopia of 9mm PCCs on the market, pistol caliber carbines, and also PDWs, personal defense weapons like the braced pistols, or, what we would call an SBR, but legally they're not. But the little brace pistols like the Flux Raider and things like it, Glock conversions, SIG conversions, there's a bunch of those on the market. You'll also gain some velocity out of a PCC. Now, you might think, great, this is great. Well, not always. Again, remember, we talked about that hollow point technology and how far it's come and how good the modern hollow points are in a fighting handgun size barrel. Now, if you go shorter than that, they may not expand because they're going too slow. And if you put them in a PCC, they may over-expand. You might think, over-expand, how is that? That's not a thing. A bullet's penetration is directly related to its surface area presented when it hits the target and going through the target. So the more that bullet expands, the less it is going to penetrate. That's how that works. It may expand too much too rapidly and actually penetrate less. It opens up so wide it has such a large surface area it fails to penetrate. You may run into this with a PCC. This is something to be aware of. There's much less testing in, so your 9mm round that may be great out of your handgun may be abysmal out of your carbine. So this is something to be aware of. Talking about it for hunting, again, you may be better off with a truncated cone type bullet in a PCC, depending on what you're hunting. You may find a round that gives you sufficient expansion and penetration out of a carbine. May want to use on something if you stuck to like a broadside shot on a deer. Again, this is not the best caliber. We're talking about how do we maximize it. I'm not saying that you should put away your 30-06 and take your 9mm PCC deer hunting. It's a horrible choice. But in a survival situation where you have it, or let's say it's your truck gun, you have a, Kel-Tec sub 2000, or you have a Flux Raider because it's what you can have in your laptop bag, carrying it to work and back, and you find yourself in a survival situation, we're trying to maximize the 9mm for survival, realizing it's a horrible choice. I love the 9mm for a defensive handgun on my hip against people. I've done quite a bit of hunting with it. I do that because it's really challenging. It's not great. It's not a great choice. So I've said that already in this episode, but I don't want people to think that I'm telling you that it's a good choice. It is not a good choice. We're making the best with what we have. So if you have a 9mm, these are things to think about. We talk about the PCC for hunting, but the PCC, most people have those for defense against people, right? And that makes sense. But a lot of people there's not that it's not a thing, it is a thing, but it's way over romanticized and overhyped. I can use the same magazines from my handgun in my PCC and vice versa. I'm gonna be, pulling mags out of my war belt and taking them out of this gun and putting them in this gun. Generally, gunfights don't happen like that. They're way too fast and dirty, right? And going back to the ammo selection, yeah, they might both shoot 9mm, but the rounds that do well out of your carbine probably aren't the rounds that are going to do good out of your handgun and vice versa. So I think that's a bit overplayed. So I wouldn't worry so much about that. I would pick the best rounds that perform well out of your carbine and out of your handgun. You could even have 3 guns with that same caliber. You could have more, but like you could have a little teeny pocket gun, which I don't advocate carrying day to day, but there's just certain situations where you do have to carry one. It's your best option. A little teeny pocket gun in 9mm, a full-size fighting handgun in 9mm, and a PCC in 9mm. They're almost certainly not going to have the same ammo or use the same ammo. They can use it, meaning you pull the trigger and it makes noise and sends rounds in a general direction, but hitting what you're aiming at, good terminal performance, I'm not telling you that's a good idea to carry the same ammo on all 3. One of the good things that I didn't talk about in the beginning, I probably should have, about the 9mm is economy of scale. For centerfire rounds, it's like the cheapest one as economy of scale. Find some crazy deal on something else. Generally, centerfire ammo 9mm is going to be cheaper. That's, if people are being honest, that's a big reason they get a PCC, because a lot of the PCCs, you look at them like, and these are probably good guns, a Ruger PC carbine, Smith & Wesson folding carbine, they weigh as much as an M4. That's why I don't own one. I'm going to carry a gun that heavy. I'm going to carry an M4. I don't care that it'll swap mags with my handgun. I have a proper fighting rifle, not a PCC. Ammo is cheap and more affordable. If you're going to practice with it more, if you've got a budget of, let's say, 100 rounds a month, or $100 a month, rather, for practice for ammo, I train with the gun that's your truck gun, that's your carry gun, your handgun. 9mm is where it's at. That's one of the big reasons I switched to it way back in the day, right? I can train more with it. And more important to be able to hit what I'm shooting at, and you know what does that? Training and practice. So that's a big attribute of it. The other one is recoil. Now, this one's tricky because a lot of these cheap PCCs, they're going to recoil more than an M4. They're going to recoil more than an AR-15. How can that be? Well, it's just how the system operates. No, a 223 is far more powerful. Most, even your basic M4 is going to have that direct impingement, delayed unlocking of the system. So you're not getting all that recoil at once. It's more spread out. A lot of the cheaper PCCs are direct blowback, like a high point PCC or the ones I talked about earlier. the way they do that cheaply is they have a big, heavy bolt that basically slams back and forth. That's not conducive to good recoil impulse. Now, is it prohibitively bad? No, but it's probably as bad or worse than an M4. So again, doesn't make sense there. So if you're looking for one where you can shoot a bunch and have less recoil, I would look towards some kind of delayed action, a roller delayed action. The CMMG Banshee has like a radial delayed action. There are others, but something other than a direct blowback. A direct blowback, fine, but realize you're probably getting that because it's cheap, not because it's good. But getting back to the cheap economy of scale, the ammo, practice with it. Practice with your PCC. Practice with your go-to fighting handgun. Practice with it and find out what ammo your gun likes when you shoot it. Find out what shoots point of aim, point of impact as far as a training round than a defensive round. Also talking about a survival attribute. Now, it's not really, I don't think, any lighter than 223. It's smaller, but if you're talking about like a 55 to a 62 grain, the heavy part of the ammunition is the bullet. A 9mm is going to be generally between 115 grain and 147 grain. I know there's outliers, but those are the main spectrum there. It's going to weigh as much or more as your 223. Going to weigh as much as a 308, but the main thing is it's smaller. So loaded magazines, you're talking about going back to that laptop bag. Are you going to be able to carry a lot more ammo in there for the size? Maybe not the weight, but the size is important too. If you're talking about carrying a pack, carrying it in a bag, a man-portable system, that's kind of important. There are some other ammunition I'd like to talk about maximizing for survival. These should not be your go-to. I'm not saying these are great for home defense because of, I don't want over-penetration. Stop with that. I hear that. So it's so ridiculous. Anything that's going to stop a person reliably is going to go through drywall. Case in point, I can go punch a hole in drywall. I cannot punch a hole through you or through really any attacker. I can punch a hole through drywall. I can pretty easily get through an interior door on most houses. And I'm not some hulk of a man. Anything that's going to stop a person is going to go through drywall. Hit your target. That's the solution to that. Stop worrying about over-penetration. It's ridiculous. The internet forum thing. Get the good ammunition that's going to stop the threat or put meat on the table. Stop worrying about over-penetration. These should not be your go-to. Very limited application. But not for defense against people, but there are super high velocity, lightweight rounds. Something like frangible ammo. Now, very limited, but we're talking about maximizing the 9mm for survival. If you're talking about on a homestead or things where varmints are a big deal, and you don't want to damage farm equipment, tractor equipment, shooting inside a barn, things like that, frangible ammunition, if you want to get any kind of range, for varmints can be devastating. I'm not talking about shooting it to eat it, I'm talking about shooting it to get rid of it, like you got rats in your feed, or the old saying, the fox in the hen house. The frangible ammo, good for that. If you sighted your gun with it and you can hit what you're aiming with it. I'm not saying these next ones have no applicability, but don't think that the birdshot rounds for your 9mm, which they do make, is going to turn you and your 9mm into a 12 gauge or a 20 gauge or even a 410. They are super, super limited. Very, very close range. I'm talking about measured in feet. You can do things like take out a snake. That's a problem. Or very, very, very small game. They are very limiting. Talking about maximizing survival, you've got that laptop bag. Maybe have a few of those in there for those certain situations. Again, don't think you're going to load up your PCC with the shot shells, the 9mm birdshot, and it's going to turn it into a 410. It's not even close. It's kind of comical how bad those rounds can be, but in very certain niche applications, they can be applicable. Remember, in gunfighting, in defense, and in hunting, what's actually important? Getting a hit in the acceptable area quickly with an ammunition that will do the job that you want it to do. I hope this has been a good, thoughtful episode for you guys out there. So many people use a 9mm. And I'm a fan of the 9mm. Again, for a defensive handgun on your hip, I think it's the best choice the vast majority of the time. I'm not going to try and use unequal weights and measures and tell you it's the best survival caliber or even a good survival caliber. But if it's what you have and you want to maximize it for survival, there are things you can do and things you should think about and limitations that you should be aware of and not make it some fantasy. It's just as good as a 12 gauge. It's not. Or it's equal to an AR-15. It's not. But if it's what you have, there are ways that you can leverage it to get the most out of it. And hopefully this was a helpful episode for that. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all that you do. It's been a while since I've done a tactical tip, but I was putting on my holster today at the gym, and it got me thinking. I'm a big fan of, again, full-size fighting handgun on the strong side hip, outside the waistband. One of my favorite go-tos for holsters, whatever holster it is those Tech Locks or something like a Tech Lock. I think Tech Lock is a brand name by Blade Tech. Could be wrong. But something like a Tech Lock where you press the sides or the bottom and it unlocks and you can take it on and off your belt. And sometimes those things slide around on your belt. My tactical tip is take a couple of rubber bands, 1, 2, 3, whatever it takes. Just wrap those on the side of the Tech Lock. Just simply stop that holster from moving back and forth on your hip when you're running, when you're bending over, when you're doing stuff. Just simple rubber bands. Will they last forever? No, but every couple of months you just put a new rubber band on there, right? You probably got spare rubber bands laying around somewhere. It's a good use for them. That's your tactical tip of the day, your tactical verse of the day. Classic. Be strong and of good courage. We'll back up a little bit. No man, this is from 1 Joshua if you're not aware, no man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and of good courage. Thanks, men, and have a blessed day.